Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ad Project Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Joe Schellerud from Ad Advance, and today I am joined by Mr. Matt Wickland again. Matt, excited to talk to you today?
Likewise, Joe. Yeah. Exciting topic.
Yeah. So today what we wanted to go through is conversation that we've been having with a lot of different sellers. People are looking at current prices and they're looking at a whole host of increasing fees, whether it's on Amazon side or it's on the supply chain side. With inflation hitting, we're at, I believe, 40-year highs for inflation right now. Overall, we're seeing fees go up, and we're also seeing that to sustain these margins, prices are going to need to go up on a lot of products. And so Matt did a good deep dive on kind of conversion rate versus price. So as we increase price, how does this impact our conversion rate? But then what we wanted to do is kind of tie it back to how this ties into your advertising, some key tests that you can look at. And so overall for this episode, we really want to focus on price, how you can do different tests for price and key things you should be looking at when adjusting price and how it impacts all these other variables. So Matt, with that intro, maybe you want to walk through the case study that you did and kind of go through like key takeaways that you had?
Sure. Yeah. So I ran a multiple regression analysis of conversion rates versus AOV for year-to-date 2022. So basically I took...
And walk through what AOV is.
Average order value. So that is the product of your price point and the typical units per order that product averages. So really, I mean, for the context of this podcast, you can think of AOV just in terms of price. We'll use them semi-synonymously. It's semi-difficult to control the number of units per order. And in most cases, it's single brand units per order. So I think we can simplify things and just speak to price for the sake of this conversation. So I regressed conversion rates.
Yep. So for this conversation, like Matt was saying, yeah. So what Matt was saying for AOV, like unless you get multiple orders constantly for different products, price is going to be pretty equivalent to AOV. So I think price is a little easier to understand. So we'll probably refer to everything as price, like Matt said, going forward, just so it's a little bit more straightforward. But no, when we say price, if you do have a lot of multiple unit orders, AOV is going to be more correct overall, but we'll just call it price.
Sounds good. Yeah. So for the study I did, I regressed conversion rate against price points for products. And I only looked at order campaigns that had 10 plus orders to make sure that we had a material data set and a decent relationship between conversion rate and price. You know, I don't want to look at something with a $10 price point and 100% conversion rate because there's one click and one conversion. So looked at 10 plus orders and then price points from, I think it was $10 to $200. And I stripped any sort of branded conversion out of this analysis too. And the key reason why I did that was because people that search for branded terms are already familiar with the offering. And so they're typically aware of the price points and more ready to convert because of that. So I wanted to look at straight up category keywords and product targets and evaluate the relationship between conversion and price. It's really important because conversion rate and price are common variables in both the sales and ACoS equations. So your conversion rate increases and the other variables remain the same. You're going to see higher sales and a more favorable ACoS or ROAS. Similarly, if price increases, conversion rate, traffic, or CPC, the other variables remain the same. If price increases, your sales go up and your ROAS improves or your ACoS improves. So because those are two metrics that brands tend to really hone in on for good reason, the relationship between the variables that determine them is a really important one. So what I found was that there is a very strong relationship between the two. And as price increases, conversion rate decreases. And like most things, there's a pretty strong curve that it follows, with some variability based on, the catalog, the category, the product mix, and all that good stuff. But there's a strong relationship between the two, and as price increases, conversion rate declines. So that those formulas that I was talking about, the metrics that affect sales and ACOS, it's not as simple as like if conversion rate increases, sales increase, ACOS decreases, or more importantly, if price increases, sales don't always increase and ACOS doesn't always increase. That's really intuitive, right? Like a higher price point product requires more consideration. There could be another offering on the market that's lower costs, so people will click through, show interest, and then maybe jump to a lower price offering. The higher the price, the more price sensitive people are. It impacts people's conversion rates. But understanding where you fall on that curve and the impacts of each incremental price change is really, really valuable information for brands.
Yeah. And so overall, like the key takeaway is that yes, if we increase price, but everything else stays the same, like profitability and ACOS is going to improve. But what we're seeing, and it makes intuitive sense, as you increase price, your conversion rate, meaning the probability that somebody buys your product after clicking on it, is going to go down. And so it leads to this fundamental item where we had to find the ideal spot to try to set price where it's not negatively impacting conversion rate more than the price increase. And so it's a really difficult situation that a lot of sellers are finding themselves in right now, is that while we need to increase price because we're getting squeezed on our margins and our fees, when I increase price, say I increase price 10%, if my conversion rate is 10%, now it drops to 9%, my conversion rate just dropped by 10% too. And so I increased my fees, but now my conversion rate went down by the same amount. At that point, I'm just breaking even in terms of like my ACOS. And so in some instances, say if I increase my price by 10%, but conversion rate drops by 20% because I'm in a really competitive category, it can actually set me back in terms of my ACOS getting worse at that point. Even though I make more margin on each unit sold, I'm selling less of a percentage of those clicks that come through. And so what was really interesting with the analysis is just seeing the trend as you go between price and conversion rate. And then it really helps highlight like the key tests that we had to be looking at when raising price. It's really not just looking at price itself and comparing overall sales. It's looking at the conversion rate that goes along with that too and how it's impacting everything.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you brought up a good point talking about the 10% increase in sales, 20% drop in conversion rate, how you can actually see worse results from a price hike. On the sales equation side, we have traffic, we have conversion rate, and we have price, which dictates your sales. And there are ancillary effects to a price hike beyond just conversion rate too. This goes a tad outside the scope of this podcast episode and the relationship between conversion rate and price, but a price hike also impacts your traffic. Key reason being, when somebody executes a search and they see your listing with higher price point relative to other similar products, the likelihood of a click-through goes down. Or if you have a product with high LTV, high repeat order rates, and people are used to a certain price that they pay for it, and that's now increased, people are less likely to click through, go back to the listing, and purchase another product too. So there are ancillary effects to price changes beyond just conversion rate that can benefit or hinder your account performance.
Yeah. And some unique cases that we're seeing too. So there's multiple different instances where people are looking at increasing price. And the first case, which is really difficult, is if you feel like you need to be the first person in your category to actually increase price. Everybody's always holding out to try to not be that first person, because if you're going up and everybody else is staying the same, you're probably going to see that negative conversion rate impact, because now you're looking much more expensive than the rest of your competitors. What's nice is if everybody who is experiencing the same fees goes up at about the same time, now those actual conversion rate impacts may be a lot less because your competition is priced similarly. As you go up in price, you may still see conversion rate drop off a bit, because now people have to think about it a little bit more. But if inflation is impacting everybody at the same time in the same rate, then you may not see those impacts overall. And probably one other note too is that we're talking about the common scenarios where when you increase price, conversion rate goes down. We do have these outlier scenarios too, where especially as you start getting into like luxury goods or different items which can be branded more as like luxury, where we've seen multiple cases where increasing price actually leads to a higher conversion rate. And I think people are taking that increased price as a perception of quality overall. But that typically falls into the luxury goods standpoint, where it actually goes against this analysis. But in general, for most products that don't fall into that category, as you increase price, especially if you have to be the first person to go, I think that's when you're going to see the most massive impacts. If you're going along with the market and everybody's ratcheting it up, you're probably going to see much less of an impact in terms of the conversion rate hit that you see.
Totally. Yeah. Competition is the key externality in this relationship. So, a lot of Amazon shoppers are brand agnostic. Amazon's doing its best to move people away from that standpoint and give brands as many branding tools, brand awareness tools as possible to create a connection with their shoppers. But really, there are a lot of very close substitutes on Amazon. And if somebody's priced better than you, it's easy to switch. And it's also difficult to track competitor prices. So even if you had a very high confidence model in pricing the relationship between, or in calculating the relationship between price and conversion rate, it's that competition is like a key variable that can throw a wrench into that equation. So you always have to look at it in context of what the competition is doing too. And if you're like the majority of brands out there that are facing rising costs, the cost of a shipment has gone up drastically over the last couple of years just due to supply chain issues. If you have some sort of advantage, but are facing short-term rising costs, it may be worthwhile to keep your price point static just to beat out the competition. In terms of ranking benefits, if you can drive more velocity, order velocity, sales velocity than your competition, you're going to climb in rank. And if you don't expect it to be a long-lived cost or a cost that you can't eat, then it can position you really well with that price advantage.
Sure. Yep. And so I think the big thing is that as we're looking at different price changes, and right now we're talking about price increases, it's really not just focusing on the margin that you gain from the price increases, but now tracking it back to one, the immediate hit that you see in your conversion rate. And then two, the longer term hit that you could potentially see in traffic too. And so that's another secondary impact that could hit, is that if you have to increase your price and now conversion rate drops, we know that conversion rate is a huge piece of ranking. And another huge piece of ranking is your click-through rate. And so if you're priced higher, now your product detail page may not get as many clicks. And so over time, you could actually see a ranking hit too, because of the increased price that you have. And so when we're looking at the analysis, you could say, all right, before I started with this smaller margin, but I had a lot greater volume because my conversion rate's higher and I'm not taking this organic ranking impact. Or after the price increase, now my margins look a lot better for each unit sold, but I'm not selling as many units overall. And it's just comparing the profitability between the two. And it's like looking at, okay, I increased my price by 10%. How did that impact my conversion rate? And now you can take that number and tie it back to your advertising results to see how those really end up in terms of ACoS, which also impacts margin. So there's a lot of pieces to take into account from an overall profitability standpoint. It's really looking at just volume times that margin that you get before and after the price change. For advertising, it's really looking at the increase in AOV, average order value or price, offset by any impacts that you saw to conversion rate. And that's going to determine the difference that you have in your ACoS.
Totally. Yeah. I think a key note of this is like costs are rising for tons of brands out there, and it can be scary to make a price adjustment, to raise your price, especially when competition hasn't done it. But I would encourage you to test. So split tests, run A/B price tests, and track metrics, the metrics that we've focused really heavily on in this episode, and figure out, is this sustainable? What's it doing to my account? If you don't test, you don't know. And it may not have any adverse effects. If your branding's on point and you're able to differentiate your product, in some strange case studies, it can have positive effects. So you don't know unless you try. So there are good price testing software options on the market out there, or you can do the measurement and analysis yourself too. I guess just like one of the key takeaways that I want to emphasize coming out of this episode is give it a shot and just know what to look for. And those are the metrics Joe was speaking to. How does traffic change? How do your sessions and page views increase or decrease when you increase your price? How does click-through rate change? Are people less apt to click through on your ads than they were previously because your price point's higher than it was previously? How does your LTV change? Are you seeing as many repeat orders as you were previously? Did your repeat order rate drop? And probably most importantly, how does your conversion rate change? You can look at this on the advertising side by taking orders over clicks, or you can look in your business reports and look at unit session percent, or if you modify those reports to include additional metrics, order item session percent, which just takes like the units per order factor out of the equation. It's a more apples to apples measure of conversion rate to the sponsored calculation. So you have all of these metrics and all of these reports at your disposal. Give it some time. It's purely based on volume. You need to generate a fair amount of results and test the market, build a decent data set to be able to make good assumptions from the data, but just review it and let it tell you how it's impacting your business. And you'll get a right or wrong answer coming out of that. There's risk that, if you look at it from too short of a time frame, like people may become less price sensitive, or competition may see your price hike and make similar adjustments in kind. You're
willing to finally make the move.
Yeah, exactly. So key thing from my end is just make sure to test. Don't be scared to test the waters, but just do your due diligence on those changes and make sure that it's driving the results that you're anticipating and need to see for your business.
So Matt, from the advertising standpoint, if somebody says, "All right, I'm gonna increase my price by 10%, and I'm gonna do this test," is there any preliminary moves or things that we should be looking at on the advertising side, or is it more waiting to see how it shakes out and then responding after that? How do you view that?
From my standpoint, it's more the latter. So I don't know how the market's going to react to a price hike, and so I'm going to wait and let the data tell me. I know typical conversion rate patterns. So I know that with a price increase, that conversion rate typically does drop. And but what I don't know is, does it drop in proportion to the price increase? So if you have a 10% price increase, does conversion rate drop by 10%? Or does it drop by 15% or 5%? If the percent change is less than the price change, then the percent decrease in conversion rate is less than the percent increase in price, then I know that we're successful. Like, we're going to see better outcomes from it. Barring the traffic side of the equation, higher sales and better ACoS. It's not going to affect CPCs, but it could affect your traffic. So what did it do to impression, or what did it do to click-throughs? What did it do to click-through rate? But yeah, really most importantly, where did conversion rate land? How much did it affect it?
Yep. And I think this does a great job of just painting the picture too on how these outside factors really impact your advertising as a whole. So without making any changes to our advertising, we can see our ACOS go up or down just based off of the offset between the increase in price. So increases average order value, which is great, and potential decrease in conversion rate, which is bad. And so how much do these offset each other? If the price hike up is bigger than the conversion rate decrease, then it's good. And ACOS is actually going to drop and our advertising results are going to get better. If we see it go the other way, ACOS can actually go up. And then we see our advertising results get worse. And again, this is without us even touching our advertising. So I think it paints a really good picture too, just how all these items are interrelated, how your product performance can really impact your advertising and how your price can really impact your advertising results as a whole. So like Matt said, fully encourage you to test. Like everybody's experiencing these increases in fees, increases in supply chain costs, increases in raw costs. And so these are pieces that we're going to have to keep talking about as we go along. And so the only way to know how it's going to impact your brand is to test as you go. Also watching competition and being able to respond there too. So Matt, I guess any other key pieces or takeaways that you'd add for the episode?
Yeah. Just sitting in my seat, if you're a seller and you're listening to this podcast and you decide you're going to experiment with price and you're using like an agency or an advertising service provider, let them know, because that's something that I want to stay in tune with and I want to be able to help guide you, give you my perspective on what the data is telling me. And I like to know, when we're making changes and stuff in our campaign. So keep your advertiser in the loop and we'll give you our candid feedback on what we're seeing as an outcome of the price change. Yep.
I love it. Yeah. Well, this has been another episode of the Ad Project Podcast. Today we talked all about pricing, how that impacts everything. Really appreciate you joining as always. For other content like the case study that we were just talking about, feel free to connect with me, Joe Schellerud, on LinkedIn or Ad Advance. And Matt and I are always putting out different posts like this, just kind of trying to share the information that we're learning, key case studies that we have. So that's a great spot to connect. Send me a message. Love to hear the feedback as we go. And as always, thanks for taking the time to listen, and we'll see you on the next episode.